The Key to Time, Doctor Who's 16th season, continues with the third serial, The Stones of Blood, first broadcast in 4 parts from the 28th of October to the 18th of November 1978. The Doctor, played once again by Tom Baker, and his companions Romana, played by Mary Tam, and K9, voiced by John Leeson, locate the third piece of the Key to Time on Earth, specifically in Cornwall. So they head down there where they end up meeting up with two women named Professor Rumford, played by Beatrix Leman, and her kind of assistant and friend Vivian Fay, played by Susan Engel. They are examining a group of stones, or kind of a set of stones referred to as the Nine Travellers in Boscombe Moor. But while there, they also encounter members of a druidic sect who worship a god known as Kalich, and they're led by a man named De Vries, played by Nicholas McArdle, and Martha, played by Elaine Eves Cameron. Now, ultimately, I think this story is probably the weakest of the Key to Time series so far, at least from what I've seen. I mean, I've heard not great things about the power of Kroll, but I'll get there when I get there. But the Doctor ultimately discovers that, well, several things. One, aside from the druidic sect that they encounter, there are also strange things going on around the stone circle, and that eventually leads them to discover that some of the stones are actually sentient, and they're actually creatures known as Ogri, which kind of just like moving stones that are seemingly powered. The sects essentially activated them by committing sacrifices there and creating blood on them, which powered them up. But spoiler alert, if you don't want to know this before you go through it, it's eventually revealed that Vivian Fay is actually a being known as Césaire of Diplos, and she was kind of tried on her planet of Diplos for stealing the Great Seal of Diplos. And she was on a ship that was going through hyperspace when she somehow managed to escape and kind of trap the prison guards, which are known as the Megara, which are voiced by David McAllister and Gerald Cross, and now is planning to do some things to gain great power. Now, as I said, I think this story is possibly the weakest of the Key to Time series so far, but I don't think it's unwatchable. I actually did enjoy it. I mean, there's parts in I think around part 3 and 4, that I was kind of glad Professor Rumford didn't need her handheld the entire time. I mean, you know that whenever the Doctor starts into a scientific monologue, eventually the characters will just look at him weirdly. I mean, it's like Billy Piper said in School Reunion. With you, did he ever do that thing where he'd explain something at like 90 miles per hour and you go, what? And he'd look at you like he just dribbled on your shirt all the time. To which I kind of feared that was going to happen, but while Professor Rumford, played by Beatrix Lemon, at first does seem a little bit confused about everything. I mean, when he starts talking to her about some of the basic scientific principles and explain to her exactly what hyperspace is, she actually does understand, and she is able to pick up on it quite quickly. Which I know the kind of point of Romana as a companion is that she's a companion who can keep up with the Doctor, which is nice. It's refreshing to see, but it is nice just to see a human being not be totally in the dark about everything. It's nice to see she could keep up, and she definitely understood. Now, as the only two complaints I would really say about this particular storyline, well, actually three complaints. Let's start with the minor one. Part 3, I felt it suffered a bit from the X-Files problem. And when I say the X-Files problem, it's like when you're talking to someone and they mention that the X-Files is a very dark show. Oh, you mean it's got lots of horror imagery and gritty style themes? Well, it would be if you could see anything. Part 3, because it takes place at night, it is quite dark and it is difficult to see what's going on. But anyway, that's a minor problem. The other two things, which are possibly a little more heavy, are one, I think we could have used a bit more of the sect, or the cult, whichever one you want to call it. which is that after part 2, the sect kind of just disappears. They're killed off. And I get that's because they wanted to focus on Cesare of Diplos as the villain, but I don't know, I think you could have had some fun with the sect. Actually make them a bit more sinister and make them really kind of interesting, but no, you just kind of drop that after part 2. Fair enough. The other thing that I would say about it is Mary Tam's acting. And throughout most of the story, as throughout most of this series, she's fine. But there was one point that I felt, yeah, that she's not best in this particular scene, and that was, I think it's during part 4, when she and the professor are at her cottage, kind of dealing with searching through all the research, and then the Auguries show up and start closing in, and then Romana just turns to the professor and not even hurriedly just says, "Come along, professor." It's just like, really? Not even a hint of worry, frustration, panic? You just. I mean, I get she's a time lady. I get that they're supposed to be kind of more high class and able to sort through things better, but even a hint of panic in that moment. I mean, you've got sentient stones closing in on you. A little bit of panic wouldn't do, but as I said, the three small criticisms I'd say of this particular story. One, in parts, it could be a little too dark to actually see anything. Two, we could have used a bit more of the sect. And three, I think Romana could have used a little bit more panic in that one moment. But it is also nice to see a bit of common sense with her. Like at the beginning of the story, when the Doctor takes her to Earth, she comes out and her outfit, I think she looks a bit like a female golfer. But anyway, that's just me. I might just be being prejudicial, I apologise. And also, she's wearing heels. You're going trekking through the moors in heels. And yeah, later on, they do provide her some new clothes. A pink dress, which is fairly iconic of this version of Romana, and a pair of walking boots, which are much better. I also think the Megara I thought were funny enough. I mean, they're supposed to be kind of justice robots, and they're basically just a group of stars, which shoot sentient stars talking to each other. And the trial they have is actually fairly funny, and I do like how the Doctor is able to defeat Cesare by that when he is about to be executed, he pulls Cesare in with him, and the Megara stop the execution briefly and end up scanning her brain just to see if she's alright, see if she's alive, which they refused to do beforehand, given that they thought there's no point. We're trialing you, Doctor. But then when they actually see she is actually the criminal who has managed to trap them, they're like, right, we gotta take her away. So I think overall, the Stones of Blood, I'd probably say it's the weakest of the Key to Time series so far, but I wouldn't say it's unwatchable. I'd say you can definitely get at least one good viewing out of it, and I think it does provide some nice stuff. I mean, Professor Rumford, as I said, she's a sweet lady, and she does provide that kind of friendly atmosphere. Vivian Fay or Cesare of Diplos, when she actually gets going, she is actually pretty sinister, and the Megara I think are good. As I said, we could have used a bit more of the sect, but then again, that's just me. So that's my quick thoughts on the Stones of Blood. Anyway, next one up is the Androids of Tara. I wonder what I think of that. Anyway, until then, see ya.